Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Ultimate PastCast. I am your host, your boy HistorMeans123 on Instagram, and I'll be joined by my friend Miguel. Say hi.
Hiya.
Right, and because I'm vain and love attention, my name is Ashley. Right, for those who don't know. And well, let's just get some explanation out of the way as to why you haven't really seen this podcast a bit earlier. And essentially, we had it recorded a while back. The audio messed up, and it got a bit wrong, and then so now we're re-recording it now. And also on top of that, I had a lot of work to do. We both sort of had a lot of work to do for college and that. So we sort of have now only got this time to record this first episode, but we should record it more often now. Then we should be able to get it sort of more consistent once you further on down the road. So let's get sort of a little bit brief on what this podcast is going to be. Well, not brief, like a briefing is what I meant to say, right?
Yes.
And so essentially, we're going to have we're not too sure exactly how consistent it'll be. It might be weekly, it might not. It might be like bi-weekly. We don't know yet. Depends on our schedules. And well, yeah. Then it depends on sort of the ease of the topic and finding some gameplay. I'll release multiple different versions of the same episode. Some with some gameplay for those of you who wanted gameplay alongside the voice, or like the podcast. And then if not, you can always look at the episode that's just this screen that I've got on here, which is just Discord. And so essentially we've got the Discord, right, which is the Ultimate PastCast Discord. I will link it to, in every place I can in relation to these episodes. If you want to come along and join, I mean, yeah, you even if you want to join, just ask me for the link and I'll send it to you on Instagram. So yeah, if you want to come along and join and have your voice, because we will be doing episodes where we bring people from the Discord into the podcast, get their opinions and their views, and we'll also be doing sort of like fan requested history. So if you say want China, we'll be doing some on China. If you want the Middle East, we'll do some Middle Eastern history. If you want to do America, we'll do some American history. I mean, it's just whatever you want to talk about or learn about, or whatever, we'll sort of be doing it. We also have our own interesting selection of things that we plan on doing. So this first episode is going to be who's to blame for the First World War. We have planned, I'm not entirely, sure if we'll do it yet, which is sort of the history of the Mandate of Heaven and whether or not it still affects China today. We'll be looking at the history of religion and why it's so influential. We sort of cover a wide range of topics. So, there's a lot of prospect here. And this first episode is going to be a little bit boring visually, right? I understand, right? But it's just about getting to grips with everything, which it should be fine. But once we get a couple weeks, a couple episodes maybe, and everything will get underway, and it'll be smoother. But for now, you might have to deal with this horrible profile pic to look at. So let's sort of get underway with this first episode. So today is the who's to blame for the First World War. Now we're going to be looking at three major theories. There's tons of theories, right? There are tons of theories as to who's to blame, and they're all very well argued, and there's merit in all of them, right? And it's just we have to be 100% clear that the opinions that people have can be different on this subject because it's history and it's up to interpretation, and it's not quite as clear cut as World War II, where it's big battered Nazi guy invades. It's a very complex war, and so there are many theories, but we're covering the main three today, which are Germany are to blame, the alliance systems, and collective responsibilities. So Miguel will take you through Germany, and you get to listen to in my opinion, the best voice in this podcast, my voice, for the next two. So Miguel, take it away.
Hello. So you've come here to know about Germany. Well, let me help you out. During the 1890s, Germany became the strongest industrial state in Europe. Its population grew from 49 million in 1890 to 67 million in 1913. Millions of farmers migrated from the rural areas to the city, going from half to 1/3 of farmers left. Industrial output doubled. Coal went from 89 million tonnes per year in 1890 to 277 million tonnes a year in 1914. Steel, which was 17.6 million a year, was more than the combined total of France, Russia and Britain. Lots of well-known chemical companies like Bayer, Siemens, I think it's a weird name, AEG and Hoechst were created in this time as well. It was only agriculture in Germany that was in a structural crisis. Social Darwinism was also in full action in Germany as well, with Germany believing that they were stronger than all those around them and they could live and defeat anyone weaker, other countries. With the domestic policy of Germany, Bismarck was fired by Wilhelm. Germany was still dominated by an agrarian, feudalistic, industrial and cultural elite class system who obviously did not want to share power with lower groups. Parliament existed but could do very little against influential aristocracy, with its power-hungry motives going against liberal and progressive change. As Prussia was the biggest, most influential state in the unification of Germany, its culture reigned dominant and Prussian militarism was rife through its politics and society. In 1890 to 1914, left-leaning liberals and social democrats wanted a democratic-style leadership. The SPD, Sozialistische Partei Deutschland, kept gaining seats, whilst more right-wing parties saw electoral disappointments. However, the Prussian elite still dominated diplomacy and the military government, they became isolated to the world and country around them and became very defensive in politics and economically, while society changed around them. Free press and modern art are allowed these changes to take place. Due to the aristocrats in charge hiding away, civil society became very weak and disorderly, with nationalists fearing the left and its views. Nationalists also wanted the colonies, the empire and the place under the sun as a part of their main beliefs. Traditionalists feared democracy would rip them apart and tear down the very world that they knew, disintegrating social cohesion and national unity. Profits and economic booms were put over society and its issues. The cultural changes in Germany. Traditionalist values lost importance because of industrialization and social progression. Many rejected new progressive industrialization as they did not know what their status or hierarchy would become. Any group had two sides in dispute: post-industrialist versus industrialist, socialist progressives versus traditionalists. Everyone in politics, religion, and socio-economic groups were all fighting. People felt like they were living between two eras. A lot of big words, complicated words. The so-called fin de siècle, Katastrophen, une Aufbruchstimmung. I'm not good at German. A catastrophe and departure of sentiment became a prevalent in German society, essentially due to the complete disarray of societal structure, people believing they were going to some sort of catastrophe where their country could see dramatic issues and changes. In the foreign policy, not much. Just kidding. New foreign policy got Germany in a lot of conflict in Europe, and every European country was aware of their aggression. Germany was no longer saturate or satisfied and wanted more. Weltpolitik became extremely prevalent. Through colonial expansion and a strong fleet, Germany wanted to obtain a Platz under Sun, place under the sun, like Britain, not to put anyone in the shadow, but for their own national pride. Germany's Grand Admiral believed that the future was on the water and greatly improved the German navy. It became a symbol of Germany. This took power away from Britain, France, Russia, and America, and they would not let Germany grow into competition. The battleships had been a luxury, whilst Britain's were a necessity. 1/3 of the military budget went into Germany's navy, which meant that they could not afford a war on two fronts, which unfortunately they ended up having. The Rhine-Insurance Treaty with Russia which was a non-aggression type pact that Germany and Russia had, so long as they weren't aggressors in the Balkans or against France, but was not extended by the new government. This was one of the downfalls that they had during the war. This led to France and the French-Russian alliance in 1894, which is what Bismarck feared, and landlocked Germany between two enemies. Then in 1904, Britain made the Entente Cordiale with France, and then in 1907, the Triple Entente, adding Russia. Germany became politically isolated. They tried preventative wars to break the encirclement, and they failed to break the Triple Entente in the Moroccan crises 1905-1911 and the Balkan Wars 1908 and 1912 to 1913. The Moroccan crises were a complete failure. Jesus Christ, I don't know what which I was thinking, but it was a mess. Morocco was one of the few countries in Africa not under European control. France wanted to control it, and Britain said that they would not interfere. The Kaiser, wanting to exercise their Weltpolitik policy and stop France from getting the land, tried to stop them. He went to the capital of Morocco, Tangier, dressed up, riding a white horse, and in his speech he stated he would support Morocco. However, the Kaiser did not even care about Morocco's independence whatsoever. He just didn't want France to own it. A middle finger to the French. He wanted a conference to be set up to discuss. In the conference, only Austria-Hungary and Morocco backed Germany, while Britain and Russia backed France. This was a way of Germany knowing who would support France, and found out that Britain wasn't into appeasing just yet. France did not own Morocco and only shared its control of its police with Spain, and nothing really came of it for Germany from the first one. And the second one, it got even worse. And I will save the other war notes for when we discuss. Done. Actually, it's up to you. Go on with the Balkans.
You cut out, Miguel.
When did I cut out?
After saying, what's it called? You'll save the war notes.
Oh no, yeah. So we'll cut this bit out. But yeah, I've got some notes on the war.
Mm-hmm.
I'll save that for when we actually discuss it.
Okay.
Was I clean throughout?
Yeah. I might just keep this in because I'll be lazy, and then you all and all the viewers get to see what kind of audio issues we get. So thank you.
Nice. Yeah, cool.
Right. Well, so now let's take a look at the other two theories. So we've got a little bit of the Germany theory, but as Miguel said, he'll come back to it. I'm assuming he's got a lot on the July crisis. And I will say that so far he's pretty much gotten a lot down with Germany. However, there are historians who argue that Germany's actions were not the only ones who were needlessly aggressive. So we'll look at it country by country. So I'll look at it from the British first, at how their actions were kind of aggressive. So after Germany had announced its had sort of gone through its policy of Weltpolitik, there was a section of it which covered navy, which was known as Flottenpolitik. And Flottenpolitik essentially wanted to close the gap, the naval gap between Britain and Germany, right? However, it was never expressly their aim to overtake Britain, right? So a lot of historians have now argued that it was a little bit of an overreaction from Britain to sort of start to increase hostilities over sort of the just over a policy that was just meant to improve Germany's navy, but never meant to depose Britain from their naval hegemony, right? On top of that, Britain had essentially contributed to this idea of, I'll say it in English, right, the encirclement, right, which was essentially,
Yeah.
essentially the encirclement was the German idea that Britain, France, and Russia had encircled them, and the only way to break it was through war, right? So Germany was now had actually, and it was kind of true, had their hands tied. No matter what policy they pursued now, really the British, French, and Russians wouldn't have really gone along with it. They would have opposed. So Germany could only really look for an out through war, or find a diplomatic solution that doesn't negatively affect Germany, which was virtually impossible. So literally, there's only one path from here, and that's a conflict. But it's not really necessarily as large as what the Great War would have had, right? So we'll get on to Russia, right? And Russia are it's a surprise not many more people talk about them as much as they do. Although, the Russian Empire did sort of get its disintegration for its actions. So, I mean, essentially, Russia throughout the 1800s were messing with the Ottoman Empire. They were sort of poking it and trying to crumble it. Through a series of wars, they had managed to get Bulgaria. It's sort of like semi-independent, so like a vassalage. However, the Germans Prussians, I should say, had intervened, which had sort of stopped Bulgaria from getting as much land as it wanted, and as Russia wanted it to have. So that was sort of a little bit of like a tension point sort of starting to begin between the two nations. And then you've got sort of further in the 1800s that Russia are sort of more pursuing Pan-Slavism. And the reason they're pursuing Pan-Slavism, which is this idea that the Slavic nations should all look out for each other, is because they proceeded to get absolutely wiped, decked on by the Japanese. So they thought, you know what, Asia probably isn't the place for us anymore. So they looked towards, the Slavic world. And it just so happened that that was also the domain of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, because they also wanted a bit of that fat, juicy Ottoman Empire steak that was coming up, because they were crumbling, and everybody knew they were crumbling, right? Anyway, throughout the 1800s, a series of wars take place. There's an Albanian revolution, a Bosnian revolution, a Serbian revolution, and the Ottomans, for the most part, put it down, or grant sort of concessions in sort of in the Balkans, and so basically Greece it becomes independent. Bulgaria is, as I said earlier on, becomes a vassal. Serbia becomes a vassal. Macedonia a vassal. Bosnia a vassal. Right? They're all essentially vassal states, but like really integrated still. And then we take it to the 1900s. And this is where it all starts to go very wrong for the Ottoman Empire, and probably for Europe, right? Because in 1908, there is an Albanian revolution that takes place, and it's so heavy on Ottoman resources that they are unable to stop the Austro-Hungarians from just walking into Bosnia and just eating it, right? It's just like, I like to think of the Austro-Hungarian guy as the unstable fat guy of Europe, right? He just goes in and just starts eating things, despite the fact that he's got like diabetes and his heart is about to stop. But it's just his land, and I mean, like, the Habsburgs reign supreme, incest empire, 100% all the way, my guys. So essentially, we've I did skip out a couple bits, like, so by this point, Bulgaria is independent, Serbia is independent, Macedonia is independent. But the Albanian revolution gets crushed again, except for more concessions are to it, so it's still pretty much Ottoman, but it's got its own little language. It's like the UK, you can equate it to the UK, Scotland's still part of the UK, but it can produce its own laws and have its own education system, stuff like that, right? So it's like a devolved system. Um, so at this point, things are very tense because Serbia now is angry at Austria-Hungary because they are super nationalist, thanks to the lads, the Russians, right? Because they came in, all Slavic heart beating in their Adidas tracksuits, handing out Adidas tracksuits to all the Serbs, right? By the way, Serbia, do not like send nationalists after me. It was just a joke. Some of you wear Nike as well. And essentially what happened was the nationalist Serbs wanted revenge, and they wanted Bosnia, because they wanted to form this pan-Slavic union. Um, Yugoslavia, it had been such a massive thing for Serbian nationalists for decades now, but they really wanted to make strides to do it. And essentially they wanted to invade Austria-Hungary once they got powerful enough. Um, However, they weren't yet. Now, in 1911, there is a lot of tension in the region, and I think everyone here everyone listening to this, or most people listening to this, knows what's about to happen. On a fateful day, I can't remember the exact day. Just pretend like I do, right? The Balkan League declares war on the Ottoman Empire. Right? They had a little push from Russia. They weren't sure if they were going to do it, but they had a push from Russia, right? And essentially, the Balkan League absolutely destroys the Ottomans, right? Because the Ottomans have another issue that goes on towards the end of the First Balkan War. A little boy named Italy comes in and invades Libya, right? Which, doesn't always help things when you're sort of a crumbling empire and you're unable to sort of defend from a couple Balkan miners, right? But anyway, so the Ottomans are looking for a solution, for a peace deal. So they accept the Treaty of London, right? Which essentially they lose almost all of their European land except for Constantinople. It's Constantinople at the time, Istanbul today. And they're in a lot of trouble now because they're very unstable, but they also want revenge. They want their land back because, it's been Ottoman land since, what, the 15th century? Early 15th century? And they're not about to just give it up. So they're waiting for their opportunity, and guess what? It only takes a couple months for this opportunity to arise. The Russians, they've all got it, sorted. They're pretty dandy. Got a real wake-up call when Bulgaria started demanding land from Serbia, and this land in general, or you might recognise as Macedonia, for those of you who are quite savvy with their history, especially in this time period. Now, Macedonia had been given, well, most of Macedonia had been given to Serbia, right? And Bulgaria weren't too happy with this. So they decided to do the rational thing, the most rational thing, instead of just settling with it, getting powerful, maybe looking for a couple allies somewhere else. What they decided to do was just invade, like, I like to imagine that that the Tsar of Bulgaria at the time just snorted a line of coke and just thought, you know what, let's just run in, complete, just obliterate everything, because that's what they tried to do, and it worked at first. The war was going well until Greece joined in, until Romania joined in, and now the anti-Bulgarian League had formed. So, you know, that's not very good. I did forget to mention earlier on that Albania had been released, but they sort of aren't relevant right now. But they will be after this war. So the Bulgarian League the anti-Bulgarian League, sorry, was sort of, they were doing okay, but they weren't necessarily winning until the boys, the kebab himself, the Ottoman Empire, came in and, you know, thought, well, let's just go crazy and get all our land in Bulgaria back, and they invaded. And I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? Bulgaria lost. I mean, they're fighting a war on four fronts. You know, it's just not going to work for them. Basically, they lose all the land that they gained. The Ottoman Empire get a little bit of land. Serbia get a bit more land. Greece get a bit of land. And Romania get a bit of land. So, you know, it's all happy in the Balkans, except for the fact that in the conference, Austria-Hungary, or in the peace conference for the Second Balkan War, Austria-Hungary demanded that Serbia give up a little bit of Macedonia and give it to Albania. In return, Albania will give up a little bit of its northern land, and, you know, this was a big problem, because the Serbians were like, they were all big happy about the Pan-Slavic thing. So as soon as the peace deal was signed, the Serbians just marched their army in. Right, bang, marched their army in. Which, you know, isn't the smartest move from the Serbians. And Austria-Hungary threatened to invade Serbia, and this is where we see the potential for war to have been avoided, right? Because Germany backed Austria-Hungary in this, but Russia refused to back Serbia, right? And it's because Russia realized what was about to happen, and that a massive war was about to break out over Albania, and they sort of didn't want that to happen, and they knew that Serbia were the aggressors in this fact. So, you know, they sort of, they backed out, right? And so, as I said, this is again evidence that, like, the war didn't have to happen, and this is why it's collective responsibility. It's because at the end of the day, everyone ended up deciding that the war was going to happen, so it did, right? Austria-Hungary were happy when Serbia pulled out their troops. You know, no war was brought, right? And they get their little piece in Albania. Austria-Hungary get their influence in Albania, right? And over the next 2 years, or well, 1 and a bit years, there's a lot of tension in the Balkans, you know. At the same time, you know, Germany are looking for a little bit of revenge for the Moroccan crises. Oh, well, I wouldn't say necessarily revenge, but they want to recover. So they get a nice little diplomatic victory here. They're seen to back the winners of this. So the Entente gets a little bit hurt by this. And essentially, it's only tension from now on. It's just a little bit of tension building. There's a couple incidents with Serbia and Austria-Hungary. Nothing much really happens until the July crisis. And this is where the next theory will come into play, mostly. But I'll finish off the collective responsibility. So essentially what happened was, I think we're all aware of the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, right? But, so Germany, like a day or two after, gave the blank check to Austria. For those of you who don't know what the blank check is, it's essentially Germany were going to back Austria-Hungary no matter what. Whether it was war or a diplomatic solution, they were going to back Austria-Hungary, right? For a lot of historians, this is a point of no return. And for a lot of other historians, it's not. It could have been avoided. right? It depends on whose theory you subscribe to, and all of that. So, what happens during the July crisis? Austria-Hungary get the blank check, like a day or two after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and then they wait about 20 days. They wait 20 days, and they send the ultimatum off, right? Before Austria even send their ultimatum, Russia begin mobilization. Now, this, in my opinion, is the point of no return. Russia's aggression in this moment has led to only one thing happening. It's the Germans have to now mobilize too. And once mobilization starts, the militaries become the leaders of the nations, right? It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter if you're a democratic country, if you're a monarchist country, I think. Once the mobilization of the nation begins, the military begin to have supreme control, right? And this is exactly what happens. Russia tried to partially mobilize, so that it's only against Austria-Hungary, but then they realized that they hadn't had anything, they hadn't planned this. France declared their support for Russia, which now Germany have no other option but to break out of the encirclement, right? And so they begin plans to initiate the Schlieffen Plan. They begin to attempt to initiate the Schlieffen Plan, which I'm pretty sure most people know, but in case you don't, essentially the Germans were going to go through Belgium and Luxembourg in order to rapidly march towards Paris, to knock out France. Once they knock out France, they can move their entire force of superior army, right, to Russia, because Russia has millions of troops. I don't think, just in case, it wasn't obvious. I think it's quite difficult to understand why they have so many men, but they do. They have millions upon millions of men, and Germany just want to get subscribing to sort of rapid war. They don't really care about an attrition. They haven't prepared for attrition, so they're going for rapid war in the West, right? And essentially, this is where it all starts to boil over, and the collective responsibility starts to gain its strongest sort of its strongest push. It can really get you here. This is where WW1 truly begins, or is started by. So essentially, Russia, after realizing they can't partially mobilize, they fully mobilize, right? Serbia, meanwhile, have accepted all of the points of the ultimatum, except for one, where they only partially accept, and that is the investigation into the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, and there has to be an Austro-Hungarian representative in the council, or in the investigation team. Right? Serbia rejected that point, but they accepted the team, but they didn't accept the Austro-Hungarian. So, Austria-Hungary are in a bit of a situation, because even Kaiser Wilhelm II has said at this point that they've given up their chance for war, right? And there are accounts of him telling, or of him ordering for a sort of a Austria-Hungary to halt on the brakes on a war, right? But the message never reaches. And from my knowledge, they believe that it was the German military who had managed to block that. As I said, once mobilization begins, the military become the supreme controllers, right? Their word goes. And Germany warned Russia to demobilize, or to stop mobilizing. Russia give no response, so Germany mobilize, Austria-Hungary declare war on Serbia on the 1st of August. I think it's 1st of August. Yeah, it's 1st of August. And then a couple of days later, Germany declare war on France, and then they also declare war on Belgium and Luxembourg, and they march their armies through, which groups in Britain, who, although they say they were protecting the neutrality of Belgium, they probably would have joined in anyway. The Belgian neutrality was just an excuse to get them in quicker. And yeah, then the First World War starts, and that's basically a sort of a bit of a collective responsibility there. And now we're going to go on to a lot shorter of a theory, which is the alliance system. Now, the alliance system mainly has its argument within the July crisis, right, instead of the collective responsibility, which is that during the July crisis, right, Austria-Hungary got the blank check from Germany, right, to attack Serbia, right, and France, who, if you notice in the collective responsibility, I didn't mention whatsoever, is because France are the unlucky guys here, right? They didn't contribute to war. They dropped their revanchist policies. For those of you who don't know what revanchism is, it's sort of it's basically it's the desire to regain lost land. They basically dropped their claims on Alsace-Lorraine. Well, didn't really drop them, but they stopped pursuing them. Right? They weren't going to pursue the return of Alsace-Lorraine. Right? They didn't want to provoke Germany, and in the only time they really came to blows with Germany was in the Moroccan crises, right? However, France inadvertently gave Russia the blank check, and a blank check of its own, when they had supported Russia during the July crisis, right? In the event of a Balkan war, France would help Russia, right? This was what caused Russia to start mobilizing, right? Because they just knew that, now I can get away with war, right? And they start mobilizing. This, as I said earlier on, causes Germany to realise the encirclement has taken place, or I'll put realise in quotation marks, that the encirclement has taken place, right? And essentially they move their troops to the west and the east, and as we know, and the events still take place as it is, but without the alliance system, right, that had formed, Germany would never have supported Austria-Hungary, right, in the July crisis. But the reason Germany had supported Austria-Hungary is because they needed an ally, because if the Entente hadn't existed, Germany wouldn't necessarily need an ally. They could just continue with their goals without one. So if Britain hadn't promised to protect France hadn't promised to protect Russia, Germany wouldn't have felt encircled, so they wouldn't have allied with Austria-Hungary or reinforced the alliance. And then later, the Ottoman Empire in Bulgaria, and essentially the entire thing, without the alliance system, could have literally been a local war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, if a war even would have taken place. Because a lot of the tensions in the Pan-Slavism and Serbian nationalism was bolstered up by the mere fact that Russia, right, could do what they wanted in the Balkans because they had French support. So without Serbian nationalism, the Black Hand Gang probably never would have really had the power it had to take out Franz Ferdinand. Franz Ferdinand likely wouldn't have been shot. Or maybe I'm wrong. Franz Ferdinand could have been shot, but even still, in that scenario, there isn't a big war that's broken out. And thus, the alliance system, in this part of the argument, the alliance system is the reason for World War I. Now, to be honest with you, I personally think that collective responsibility. However, we haven't finished listening to Germany. So, Miguel, you want to take away with your facts about Germany, please.
I personally don't believe that Germany were responsible for the war so much, especially the Kaiser. I think it was not the Kaiser's fault in any way. With Germany, I feel like he was pushed by his Prussian backers in his military that were extreme power hungry, wanted the successes of war, the respect that that the society like that would give them.
But do you not think that the generals who had sort of disobeyed the the German, or the Kaiser's orders for Austria-Hungary to back down, and also the German military's desire for a conflict, is inadvertently the cause of World War I, because it then caused that powder keg to explode, and the alliance system to trigger, and
You did kind of cut out there a bit for me.
Oh, so basically, so wait, where did I cut out for you?
Like a little while, like what you were saying about generals, and then you cut out.
Okay, so do you not think that the generals? Sorry if you're listening to this again, by the way. Do you not think that if the generals who pushed for who stopped the Kaiser's orders for Austria-Hungary to sort of hit on the brakes on war, and sort of prevented any diplomatic action from taking place that caused the alliance system to trigger, or the collective responsibility to boil over and the powder keg to explode? Do you not think that that is an argument or a case to make that Germany did actually cause World War I, it just wasn't the Kaiser?
Yeah, I think that's it. I remember there was in my notes somewhere that it was. I'm not sure if it was a German chancellor. Oh yeah, so German Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg telegraphed Vienna not to mobilise against Russia.
Yeah.
But the same day, the German Chief of Staff Moltke telegraphed his opposite Austrian number, Conrad, to mobilise at once, which was sort of a split decision.
Yeah.
Coming from Germany. As well, the blank check was created by the Kaiser in full belief that there'd be no war.
Yeah.
He went on a 3-week holiday after signing the check, so in no way was he thinking that there was going to be any sort of war.
Yeah.
I feel like, for example, without sort of the push from Austria-Hungary, I feel like there would not have been so much of a war, because that was where the majority of the conflict started. That's where, so for example, the blank check pulled them in, because the Kaiser thought there'd be no sort of real thing of war, cause of war. It can be said that it was very careless of him that he didn't read properly. For example, when he read the terms that Russia had sent to Serbia, he thought, his response was he saw no reason for Austria-Hungary. Oh no, Russia. The Austria-Hungary sent to Serbia. He saw no reason for Austria-Hungary to declare war. He wrote, "A great moral victory for Vienna, but with that every reason for more war was removed."
Yeah.
And then an hour after the Kaiser had scribbled this into the margins of the page, Emperor Franz Joseph signed the declaration of war, confident of German support. So there was just a lot of lack of communication.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
But I think personally that it was Austria-Hungary, an already very fragile empire.
They wanted
to try to secure its last piece of land, and then they overstep.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I can understand that opinion, because it is very much like the Austria-Hungary were just trying to get their last breath of life, but it sort of went wrong, and caused massive war. But I mean, even still, I think that collective responsibility.
Also, as well, another way that Germany sort of swayed Britain's opinion in going to war was they'd send a secret message to Britain, saying that if they remain neutral in the war, then they would not take France's land, and instead they would just take their colonies.
Yeah.
But that just showed Britain that there was going to be a war with Russia, and it swayed the Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey's opinion in declaring war against Germany after being elected when France and Russia asked him to. So through Germany's calculation again, they did bring Britain into the war
Yeah, I mean,
So
there was a lot of miscalculation on the Germans' front because they
yeah,
thought it was going to be a swift war. But I mean, even still, because I mean, even during the July crisis and in like right up until the declaration of war in Austria-Hungary, nobody actually feared that a war would break out. Everybody just assumed that it would be it would just disappear, but it never did. And I mean, like as I said, I think collector. As I said, I was going to say just a bit ago, but collector responsibility is still my personal favorite theory because it does.
yes,
There is like this was the boiling point of everyone's hostile actions. I think that Germany gets too much of the blame, and I think that Russia doesn't get enough of the blame, or Austria-Hungary. And I do think that Britain's entire attitude in that war um, was a bit misfounded or misguided. They thought that Germany were going to be aggressive towards them, but they weren't. So it's just a bit
yeah.
iffy on that front.
No, I agree.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, as I said, it's a very complicated war because it wasn't. It's not so quite clear for World War One what was the good side, what was the bad side, because every side had a reasonable argument. Every side had like a why they ended up in the war. Not reasonable as such, but like it was an easily justifiable one. Whereas in World War
Yeah,
Two, it was clear Nazis. They are invading everyone. We need to stop them. They're at fault.
mm,
But whereas in World War One, it's just there's so much that goes into it that you can never really interpret it the exact same as someone else. You know. But with that, I reckon it's sort of time we'll call this first episode to a close. But we would like to sort of see what all your opinions are. For those of you still listening in, we would like to sort of read your opinions on it, your takes on it. What you sort of, if there's any evidence we've missed or any sort of bits we might have oversimplified or you think we misinterpreted or whatever, right? We would love to sort of read it and hear it, as long as it's civil, of course. But and yes, just another reminder that we do have a Discord, and it will be here for your engagement and for you all potentially make an appearance on the show at least once, hopefully. Right? But we do want to have a more fan engagement. So yeah, and this podcast, as I said, it's the first episode, but we're working on a couple of things to sort of make the episodes a bit more fun to look at. And I will probably release 2 episodes or 2 versions of this episode. One with a little bit of gameplay for you to just listen to or to watch while you listen to this, or one without for those of you who just want to listen. Yeah. If you wanna, do you wanna say anything?
thank you for
Final
listening.
words? Yeah.
It's much appreciated. We're starting this podcast. Well, actually, starting this podcast. Sort of to branch out in his. I wouldn't say brand, but just to add extra content. Things are getting quite boring over lockdown.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's another media for you guys just to listen
Yeah.
and just have in the background. Just enjoy yourselves. So we really appreciate if you've listened to this long, if you've listened to us for this long, or even if you just you click the link and just shown some interest or join Discord. It's much appreciated, and we thank you for it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Thank you very much. And, yeah.